Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is a movie that I don't think fully works for several reasons, and there's things we can talk about, from the classic Doctor Who level CGI effects to scenes like this where their death scene is pretty much completely played just for laughs and nothing else, even though there's still dramatic music playing in the background. It feels very tonally inconsistent. But I actually think the ending of this movie is really where I think it falls apart and why I think it didn't do as well as a lot of the other Marvel properties have done. So let's set the stage. Our main heroes are jumping through this portal as they are exiting back into the world, but at the last second, Paul Rudd sees Jonathan Majors, so he pushes his daughter through the portal and then is fighting Jonathan Majors. And the way this scene is shot certainly suggests that the daughter has a decision. We see her, the last two shots that we see in the real world are of the daughter. The decision, of course, I think an interesting one. Does she go through and help save her dad, or does she stay in the real world? And this is set up throughout the movie. In the setup portion of this movie, the first 15 minutes, we learn that there are really two issues Paul Rudd's character has. The first of which is that since saving the world, he's kind of just been sitting on his hands and not really doing anything else. There are still things that needs to be done, but he isn't really focused on those. He's just focused on selling his book. Whereas his daughter has become an activist, but Paul Rudd has been frustrated with how she's sometimes done it, often winding up in jail because she is trying to make the world a better place, but sometimes getting in trouble by doing it. So going back to the action sequence, I think Paul Rudd's arc is a pretty good one here. He is in a tough situation trying to fight with Jonathan Majors and make sure Jonathan Majors does not get back to the real world. There's probably some joke in there about not trying to make sure you don't let Jonathan Majors get back to the real world, but I digress. Paul Rudd in this situation, what is he going to do? It's a good character arc in my opinion. He decides to blow up the portal to the real world, which what happens here is it means that, okay, they're both going to be stuck in the Quantumania realm thingy. But this concludes his arc. He is now kind of fully realized that he does need to do good things again. It's not okay to just sit around and try and sell a book. Jonathan Majors now has no interest in fighting Paul Rudd and just runs to the gate. A little confused why he didn't do that earlier, but nonetheless, that's what he's doing. And we kind of have an idea of what's happening, right? It had already been set up that maybe Paul Rudd's daughter will come through this portal and everything will make sense. But no, it's instead just the Wasp comes through and she decides to save the day for whatever reason, even though that wasn't set up at all. There's also this hilarious moment where she's shooting him and then Paul Rudd steps in to punch him once and then she goes back to shooting him. Not sure exactly why that happened. And then there's a very unconvincing effect where Jonathan Majors dies, and that is the ending of the movie. To me, it's just a weird decision. Like, why didn't you have the daughter be the one to save the day? You had kind of this perfect setup only to then have her do it. And I know sometimes they shoot these things pretty far out of order and don't have the scripts fully written in time. Part of me wonders if this was the issue where they didn't realize that. But even all of what I'm saying, it's still a somewhat satisfying character arc in my opinion. I don't think it's a bad one. I think it could have been better. But then there's the actual ending, the resolution section. Paul Rudd is doing this walk through town. It's a sequence that happened at the beginning of the movie, so they're kind of bookending it with a sequence here, which is totally fine. So we're talking about how his life doesn't make sense and the things that don't make sense in his life. Usually when you do something like this, what it's supposed to highlight is how much the character has grown and how much the character has changed. And it's a little bit funny how similar some of the stuff is. There isn't really a lot of change here, but there's some changes, and so that's kind of what you look at. But the issue is they have to set up another movie as well, so they can't just have him be, happy and then that's the end of it. So instead, he thinks about something that happened earlier in the movie and then gets kind of scared about like, oh, isn't that a big deal? But of course, they need a somewhat satisfying ending. So then he says, oh, it's fine. Let's just not think about it. I guess this is their way of kind of teasing for the future. But it completely ruins his entire arc, right? The whole thing that he was going throughout the course of this movie was learning that he shouldn't just sit around and do nothing. He should actively make an effort to do good things, and instead, he doesn't do that. The movie concludes with him having a birthday party for his daughter, because he mentioned earlier that he had missed some birthdays, but that wasn't really the issue with his daughter. The issue with his daughter was he's not doing what he should be doing, which is Now, what we know exactly what he is still doing. He has learned absolutely nothing. This is a weird ending for a movie. It just is. And again, part of me does wonder if this is part of, if an issue of this is just some of the extreme kind of time constraints that sometimes these writers will have. Everyone likes to blame the writers, but sometimes it's really not their fault, and sometimes it is too. It's impossible to say for sure. But if you're an audience member who paid $15 for a ticket, I don't think you care whose fault it is. It's just a dissatisfying ending, which is why I think that movie didn't do too well. And why, when you compare it to a really good movie, I think you can see the differences. For example, let's compare it to one of the best movies of all time, which isn't fair, but let's do it anyway. Empire Strikes Back. The setup here is that we have seen Luke kind of get training throughout this movie, see if he's good enough, but it's become clear he really isn't good enough. However, due to his own frustration and own overconfidence, he has decided to go ahead and try and fight Darth Vader anyway. It goes okay at first, but eventually he is going to lose this fight because he isn't good enough, which has been set up throughout the course of the movie. Because of this, Luke is in a difficult spot, and it's about to get even worse. A theme throughout this movie has been, should he join the dark side or should he stay on the light side? And of course, he wants to stay on the light side, but after finding out that he's not strong enough to defeat Darth Vader, and Darth Vader is his father, so he has the dark side blood in him, and it would be very easy for him to join the dark side, it's devastating to him. This is a movie where they're pretty much trying to do all the same things Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania is trying to do. Set up this big villain and still create its own satisfying character arc throughout this movie. And that's what's going to happen, but in a very different way. Luke, after learning all this information, he just says, you know what, maybe I should just kill myself. And that's kind of what he does. I mean, I think he thought, my read on this scene is that he thought maybe there's a chance he could survive, but very much did not know he was going to survive. He was willing to end his life to make sure he didn't join the dark side. You could argue it's a bit of a deus ex machina and how he gets saved at the end with his friend showing up, but at the same time, as an audience member, part of why you don't care is because of the journey we've seen Luke go on, because of this incredibly emotionally impactful scene. It felt like a story that the filmmakers knew what they were telling from the jump and were able to fully execute and fully deliver on that story, whereas Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania kind of felt like a bit of a jumbled mess at times. But that's just my opinion on all of it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from y'all. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.